Okay, so we've got two more essays left from the first unit of the Britain course. We'll do the 64 election next week with the Wilson, Heath, Callaghan ones. So the next one's like, why did the Conservatives win three elections in a row between 1951 to 1959? So that's kind of then summarizing. So this one's bringing together all the factors that we've dealt with outside. So was it Labour weakness, which we talked
Yeah.
about again, and I'll just reinforce very quickly, failing to say how they would fund pension increases without taxes, divisions over the future of socialism, strong commitment and divisions over nuclear deterrent, opposition to the EEC, commitment to Clause 4, and Attlee seen as tired and leader and seen as dull and boring before he was replaced by Gateskill. So all of those things we've covered already. And then conservative strength, we've covered all of these as well. So the personal charisma of Churchill, Eden, and Macmillan before the problems, modernising of Butler to accept the post-war consensus. They built loads of schools and universities changed their education policy, hit the building of houses, which was done under Macmillan, like as when he was housing secretary. And again, the chancellors cut income taxes before each election. So again, all of these things we've covered in the other essays, which are more minor ones. And then the general economy, general economic growth after the Korean War, wages rose faster than prices, so an increase in living standards, which allowed buying cars and white goods, and more credit available to people to borrow money, and basically running off the macro economy. And again, these are only minor points. You can add loads of extra stuff from all the other essays as well when you're kind of bringing them together. So yeah. So do you have
So the good thing about this question is it's not really asking you to evaluate which of the factors is more important, correct? I mean,
no, it's a three
for
fact. This one is a three-factor essay, so you should really say which one is the most important because it's only the ones
sure,
that, yeah, you don't have to.
why
You're
did the
going to
Conservatives
struggle to get the top grades if you don't.
couldn't you say, well, why did the Conservatives win three elections in a row? Well, it was for these set of factors,
Yeah, it
you
was a
know.
combination, but you still
It
have
was
to
a
say, even if you say
combination.
it's definitely a combination, it always is. But which one had more
Right.
of an impact?
Okay, sure.
So I would say the economy.
Economy.
Yeah, because I think that the fact that the economy was going really well meant people weren't really looking for alternatives. And, all those labor weaknesses were there. But, if the economy had been bad, people may still have been tempted to look for an alternative. But the fact that the economy was going really well and labor were weak means that they weren't really going to look for it. And the same reason with the conservative strengths. I think that the strengths they had, and they did deliver. And I would break it into two bits. I think from 50, like I said, the first Churchill government from 51 to 55, I think they really delivered on their promises, and I think that made a difference. Whereas I think the other ones afterwards, I think it was just basically, especially under Macmillan, they were riding the economic wave, I think, outside. I think that was the key factor. So I would say that regardless of the conservative strengths, I mean, you could play either way. You could say that the Labour weaknesses meant, well, I don't think you play it with the economy, but like conservative strengths, you could say they took advantage of it with the never had it so good. And, life is better under conservative slogans that basically reinforce to the population that the conservatives were doing all the things that made them really, really good.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you
Good.
do you disagree, or do you also think
No,
it?
I think that's I genuinely agree. I would say the critical factor is the economy, um, aided by a a unified Conservative Party, a unified Tory Party
Yeah, because even though they keep changing leaders and they
with
change,
solid with a solid commitment to a winning policy. So
yeah,
I'd include Butler's economic policy,
yeah,
and I would also add divisions within the Labor Party that kept them from being an especially competitive alternative.
yeah. They were not a credible. They were divided. They were not a credible opposition in this time period. But I don't think
Right.
anyone was looking for an opposition anyway. You know what I mean? I think people were
Yeah.
mostly pretty happy in this period. And Butler provides that thread that goes all the way through. Even though they change their leaders every time to look like it's fresh, it's really Butler from
That's
that whole
right.
period, from 51 to
Right.
64, is driving, the conservative agenda and driving
Right.
the momentum through that time period. Like, I remember I was watching a teacher, like when I was in the training of teaching, there was one of the teachers, he was a Welsh miner, total Labour, hated the Tories, but even he was a
Hmm.
big fan of Butler. So,
Oh, really?
but yeah,
Yeah. It shows you.
but if you're a moderate Labour voter, would you have a problem with Butler's policies?
No, not at all.
He's doing everything you want, and with the added bonus of not having to deal with the whack job wing of your party. So it's like, it's like, outside of things like, but to all intents and purposes, if you put Butler's program and you gave it to someone who knew nothing about Butler, and you said, what party was he working for in the 50s?
Yeah. Yeah.
You would assume
You would say like,
yeah, you would assume he was a Labour politician.
yeah, hence the term, is it buskillism?
Yeah, yeah,
Buskillism. That's a good
yeah.
one.
So I think we agree that
Okay.
mostly the economy. You could make the case that it's Butler driving it through. I think you could go for conservative strength. I don't think Labour weakness is the main reason.
Hmm.
Because do you think,
I
unless
think no, no, I don't think. I think it's an important factor. I don't think it's the most
no,
important one.
because I think even if they weren't weak, I don't think they'd have won those elections.
Sure.
I just don't think you don't knock out an incumbent government if the economy is humming and everyone's feeling good. It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, it's very hard to. That's right. That's
Can you
a
think of a single example of a government voted out that the economy is humming really well? Maybe John
no,
Major's
not
Conservatives in
sure.
97.
But it's a general axiom even today that that's the case, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's why
So
Bill Clinton said it's the economy stupid. It's like that's the way you stay.
yeah,
If you're
and
doing
I
a good job with
think
the economy, people don't really care about other things.
that's right. That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
And then the last one then is like, why did support for the Conservative Party decline? So why, after this really successful period, did they basically decline to the point where they lose the 64 election to Wilson?
Yeah,
And we'll look at these and I'll go through them. So this is a bit more specific in terms of looking at the generalized points. So it's like a more detailed version of the other ones. Last year, the paper in 2024 had one on how important were scandals for the Conservatives. And that was
yeah,
really interesting because then it's kind of a combination. So sometimes you've got to mix them. So that would be a combination of like, was it the scandals that were most important or was it other things like poor management of the economy, crises like the Suez crisis? So again, if you know all these essays, whatever the question they give you, you could pivot to it. You know what I mean? Because if that was what important with the scandals, if you know all these other factors, you won't have a problem dealing with that question when it comes up.
yeah. Can I try answering this one? And can you correct me?
Yeah, do you want to go through the essay pack and give all the more detailed breakdown of each of these points then? Or
Sure.
do you want me to do the points first, then you answer the question, or what do you want to do?
Uh, I'll try. I've got some notes. I won't
Yeah, go on
test
there.
them,
Go.
but
So go through
see
the economy,
whether.
social
So
problems, and scandals.
then you correct me with the essay pack.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so the first is the economy. I think that's a really critical one because the economy's helped the Conservative Party through those 13 years
yeah,
through some solid growth, but then things start to slide backwards. So what's the specific there? The conservative dominance is based on the rise of the standard of living.
yeah.
So people are earning more, and the prices of goods that they're spending are not as expensive as
Yeah, they've still got
what
inflation,
they're
but
earning.
wages are
So
rising
they've got
quite a bit.
inflation, but relatively speaking,
Yeah,
they can afford more goods
yeah,
than they could before. That's good. Um, but from 1961, uh, the economy starts going backwards. So there's trade deficit.
yeah.
Yeah, the government's attempts to control it fails. There's rising unemployment.
Yeah, the balance of trade deficit,
Uh,
it's important to note, is at this point in time in the 50s, that was the biggest obsession. And like that's why Trump is obsessed with the balance of trade deficit as well. That's why he wants to whack tariffs on everything. But it
it's
was
there's
like
so
that.
much, yeah. Yeah, there's so much here that's interesting for today's political situation, isn't
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, loads of
There's a lot
parallels.
to
That's why
learn
the
from.
Britain courses have got a lot of parallels to the modern time. Yeah.
So yeah, so did you want to continue, sorry, your remarks on the trade deficit?
Yeah, so the balance of trade deficit, that was where they were obsessed with it. So obviously, balance of trade deficit means that you're importing more than you're exporting. So money is going out of the country because
Yeah,
what you're getting
yeah,
in income for the stuff you're selling is not as much as what you're spending to bring
yeah.
stuff in. And
That's
that's a
what
big
that's what
problem.
that's what Trump claims is happening with
Yeah.
the US at the
Yeah.
moment.
And the
Hence,
problem is
hence the
similar to
so-called
America.
tariffs.
Yeah, the problem is for Britain that our products were expensive and crap. So that's why it was like, oh, so no one wants to,
Ah,
because we had a guaranteed market before when we were selling it to the empire and they had to buy all our products no matter what they were like. But like now we can't just force it on a whole bunch of colonies and they have to take whatever rubbish we do. And like Germany was making better quality products, as was Italy. So, and they come up with a National Economic Development Council. It fails to fix it. They don't really know, pay pauses. But of course, they don't know how to fix it because they haven't they've not really been running the economy. And the problem is because they've taken credit. I think the biggest thing is because they've taken the credit for the economy when it's good. they're then stuck with it when it's bad.
Yes,
Because you
exactly.
can't
That's right.
say
So
we
yeah,
are responsible for it. If they'd
yeah,
have said, oh, we're lucky we're riding a
yeah,
macroeconomic
that's
wave and
right.
now the macroeconomic downturn, but because they'd claimed that they are the masters of the whole of the economy, when it turns badly, that also sticks with them as well.
That's called nailing your trousers to the mast, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So sorry, do you want to carry on
Yeah,
with the other factors of the economy? So yeah, that's the balance of trade deficit.
good. So you have a rising unemployment.
Hmm.
I think unemployment was always an issue
Yeah,
for the government,
yeah,
but it gets particularly bad at the
yeah,
end of 1963. So I think there's over 800,000
yeah. And that's the other
unemployed
thing they're obsessed with. So in
persons.
the Keynesian economics, they're obsessed with unemployment and the balance of trade deficit. And Thatcher kind of
Right,
switches that out when she brings it in 79.
right, and they're failing on both those
Yeah,
criteria.
yeah,
There's lots of strikes.
yeah,
Stock workers are striking.
yeah.
Did you have more to say about that?
Yeah, and the dock working strikes are important because obviously that's impacting your ability to import and export. So if you've got a balance of trade deficit and you can't get your products in or out of the country because the dock workers are on strike, it also shows a lack of control. Again, this is where they're starting that, the trade
Yeah,
unions are starting to steal too much control. And this is what really impacts the 60s and 70s, and no one gets a grip on this. This is when you're starting to see that industrial action become problematic for Britain, and it just accelerates under Wilson, under Heath, and under Callaghan.
yeah. Okay, so and then the final one I have is the failure of joining the EEC,
Yeah.
um, combined with the fact that the European countries have stronger growth than
Yeah.
Britain.
Better products as well. Like Germany and Italy were manufacturing things that people actually wanted to buy at prices they could afford to pay. So our economy is growing less. And that's what Wilson says of the 13 lost years. He's like, yeah,
I'm
it was good, but we could have
I'm,
done better.
I'm a bit shocked at this, James, because I have some piece of fine bone china in my house,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's got "Made in Britain" on it.
Okay.
I thought, oh, that's rather splendid. Made in Britain. Britain's
Yeah.
pretty great country. And now you're telling me that it's a piece of junk.
Not everything, but a lot of their stuff is crap. Like, if you were buying a car, would you buy a British one or a German one?
Well, yeah,
If you're buying an electrical product, would you buy
probably
British
buy
or German?
I'd probably buy a Japanese car. So
Yeah, but if you had to choose between Germany and Britain,
probably Germany,
yeah, if you're buying electrical goods, because
probably
Japan doesn't
Germany.
exist as an economic fact. Japan picks
Not
up
yet,
a
not
bit in the
yet, not
80s,
yet.
but
This is later, of
yeah, this is
course.
50s,
Yeah.
60s. It's Germany that's the industrial powerhouse. That America's doing cheap stuff. America makes cheaper products than us, and Germany makes better products than us. So what's the British place in the
What's
market?
your yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah. So
Never
yeah, so
put two and
those are all
two
the economic
together.
problems. Yeah,
Okay, so that sounds good.
yeah,
You have uh the Night of the Long Knives.
yeah. You going
Cabinet
into the
reshuffle.
scandals and leadership or the social problems next?
So I'm going into the yes, I'm going into this to the scandals. I go
Yeah,
straight to the scandals.
yeah,
They're the juiciest ones.
yeah. Go on then.
Does the Night of the Long Knives count as a scandal?
Yeah, yeah.
Not really.
Do you have
It
the essay
does.
pack? You have the essay pack with you or not?
I
Yeah.
do. But you know, I have my own notes as well.
Yeah, 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 cool. Yeah.
Um, so so that's the cabinet reshuffle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In 1962,
Yeah.
Macmillan's ostensible purpose is to give a new look to
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
party.
Hmm.
He's certainly achieved probably a bit too successful
Yeah.
because he looks like some kind of ruthless Machiavellian.
Yeah.
It's called Mac the Knife.
Yeah. Seen as
Um,
untrustworthy.
it generates a lot of generates a lot of negative
Yeah.
publicity.
Like we said, anything
So.
where you've been named the same thing as something that Hitler did is not a
Not
good
great.
look.
Not
No.
great. So that's a miscalculation.
Yeah.
He just miscalculates there. That
Yeah.
reshuffle. Okay. And then now we have the scandals.
Yeah.
Is it the coup de grace, the Conservative government?
You can argue that.
Um,
Again, that's what we'll argue which one is missing.
arguably. So we have Vassal.
Yeah.
He's a civil servant in the Admiralty who is who they discover is spying for the Soviets.
Yeah.
Not good.
Left wing of the Labour
You,
Party is probably okay with that.
But that's a crazy thing. I mean, the left wing, the left wing, the Labour Party are essentially communist. You know,
Sympathizers.
it's a fifth column.
Not as because they don't want to
Close.
become communists, but they're certainly sympathetic.
Pretty close, aren't they? 4 point column
I
four
think the
point
Tory party would
six.
argue they were close. I would argue they're still. Yeah.
So, you, so we have Philby.
Hmm.
He's a senior official in the Foreign Office, passing info to the Soviets and recruiting spies. He flees to the to Russia in
Mhm.
'63, which I think
Yeah.
might be a sign of guilt.
Yeah.
Do
And
you
you're
think
looking,
so?
this is height of the Cuban Missile Crisis
Yeah, that's really
in
bad.
63.
It's
So
really
like you're
bad.
as high up the Cold War as you can get. Yeah.
And then it gets even worse because you have the Duke of Argyll suing his wife
Mhm.
on grounds of adultery,
Mhm.
not with one, not with two lovers, but 88,
Yeah.
88 men.
Yeah.
This woman's insatiable.
She's
And
got an appetite.
and and not only that, that's bad enough. It could be 88 people, but the fact that some of these people are in fact government ministers.
Yeah.
Well,
But
that's
like I said, one of the Tory MPs is having Macmillan's wife is having an affair with one of the Tory MPs. That doesn't go into the public domain. Probably would have done nowadays. But like I guess the Prime Minister's still a little bit
and
untouchable.
can you imagine the media
Yeah.
furor with that? That's just, I
Yeah.
mean, that's like Christmas
Yeah.
coming early. All right, and then there's the Profumo scandal.
Yeah.
Right, so
Which is
Profumo
expected because
scandal.
he's really young and obviously he's having an affair with someone
So
who,
he's a Conservative MP, correct?
yeah.
Okay, and he's caught having an affair, or is it an affair? I've got liaison
Yeah,
written here.
liaison, let's say. Can't remember if he's married or not.
But it's not the same thing as an affair. He's presumably he's married.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and this young lady's name is Christine Keeler,
Yeah.
and she has links with sex work to the Russian embassy. So the
Yeah.
Russians are again part of this.
Yeah, Profumo's married at this point, by the way. I just checked it. So it is an affair. Yep.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. That's and then there are other Conservative MPs who are also somehow caught up in the scandal.
Yeah, and she's working as a prostitute in the Russian embassy. Yeah, because there was a
In the Russian
chiropractor, was he
embassy.
a chiropractor or massage therapist or some person of the Tory party who had
Right.
access to all of them who was involved in this, and there was parties at his house. And then there were leaks, obviously the Soviets, and then Profumo lies to Macmillan and says, "I never did it." Macmillan trusts him, which makes Macmillan look like a moron.
Oh God. What a shocking
Yeah.
incident.
Yeah, I think the lie
Okay,
is the
so
worst thing because then it's like because they're already thinking he's got no leadership after the night of the long knives, and it just reinforces that he doesn't know what's going on in his own party, and that all these one after the other scandals looks like complete indiscipline. And this is a time
yeah,
period in the 50s, what the Conservative Party is supposed to be the party of economic competence and like
yeah,
moral values.
that's right. And that's not good.
They are not
That's not
doing a
good.
good job on either of these two things by 64. So
Okay, so that's the scandals. That's
yeah,
that's enough scandals for you to go with.
yeah,
And then there's the social part. So I've got here. So you're going to have to fill this out,
yeah,
but I've got a kind of subversive youth subculture,
yeah. Mods
and I
versus
was dying.
rockers.
I was dying to ask you, James, whether you would be a mod or a rocker.
My dad was a mod.
Really?
Hmm. He used to be involved in like they used to like fight little
Was
gangman fights around
was
London.
he fighting people on
He
bank
wasn't like a
holidays?
massive mod, but he certainly wasn't a rocker. But like yeah, because the rockers had motorbikes and the mods had scooters. My dad can't drive, so he had neither. But they were used to get they used to be involved in like
Ah,
little fights. My mum would have been in the rockers because she used to go and she used to hang out with the motorcycle people when she was younger.
because I would have said if I was going to pick you as a mod or a rocker, James, I say that you're a rocker. I
Mm,
can't see you wearing a business suit
no,
and
I don't even
driving
wear
a
a business
scooter
suit to
around.
I don't even wear a business suit to work, let alone
See,
let alone in workplace.
exactly.
A social
So
element.
by process of elimination, I've concluded that you're a rocker.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have suited. I probably would have just been beaten up by both sides, to be absolutely honest, if I was in there on the side but yeah.
So this kind of sounds like Clockwork Orange land.
Yeah, they used to meet up in the middle of nowhere, arrange. It was like the football hooligans of today. They would arrange a meeting point. They would roll up in their scooters and motorbikes and get off and fight.
Yeah. Um,
Counterculture, which again shows lack of discipline, lack of social order, which again is the Tories' bread and butter as a party.
yeah. So things are falling apart.
Yeah. Well, the countries in general, but this is a movement. I mean, the 60s, this is the civil rights movement in America, Black Power
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah.
Britain's just catching
Yeah.
up with the world. And
Yeah.
if you look, there's a lot of parallels because we do the civil rights course in America, and you can see the parallels. Like the 50s is basically Eisenhower's America, where everything's good, but like,
Yeah.
not much happening.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
60s is where the social revolutions start coming in.
And even today, I mean, I think among conservatives, there's a certain rosiness associated, with the 50s. I think that
Yeah.
some conservatives tend to idolize
Man, they never had it so
eras.
good, and life was better under the Tories. They know.
Yeah. And whereas, when the
What
60s
Macmillan
comes
said.
along, everything gets turned on its head and everything
Yeah.
goes crazy and
Yeah. Social progress, but that's not something the Tories are interested in that much. Um, yeah. And what else do you want to add? Then I'll add around it.
that's what I've got. I've had my
Okay. So there were race
so
riots in yeah.
oh yes, the race rights. Yeah.
Yeah, race
You
riots in
tell us about
1958
those.
on Notting Hill. So the Windrush generation obviously gets a lot of backlash from Britain, and Britain has to kind of come to terms with the fact that, they're now
So
the
this is
generation from
this
past.
this is caused by immigration, post-war
Yeah,
immigration,
yeah, yeah,
to to deal with labor shortages.
yeah.
But then, because of this influx of new immigrants, as usual, immigrants are blamed you know
Everything.
for everything,
Yeah.
including lack
Housing
of houses
shortages,
and
crime, everything. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Right. And so there's a big showdown at Notting Hill,
yeah.
which then used to be what quite there were lots of immigrants living there.
It was North, yeah, a lot of people from the Caribbean.
Right.
That's where Notting Hill Carnival's in Notting Hill.
Of course, yeah, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, so the Notting Hill Carnival, which did you come with me to Notting Hill
I
Carnival?
did. I came with
Went to
you,
Carnival.
James.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
yeah,
Pretty wild.
yeah, yeah. So Carnival's great. I love Carnival, and my school is in the middle of the Carnival location, so like lots of them go as well. But I used to go to Carnival every year. I always loved Carnival. I think it's like the best representation of like modern Britain. But like obviously this was I think Carnival was set up after this, but like the riots came in that area because certain areas of the city wouldn't allow like people from the Caribbean or Africa to settle in like those houses, and they ended up in a lot of riots. There was a lot of hassle from the police, the usual stuff that was going on in this time period. So Britain was
Yeah,
like coming to terms with mass immigration that they weren't really dealing with very well in this period. And that leads to the government passing the Commonwealth Immigration Act in 1962 to limit immigration, especially non-white immigrants. It was kind of quite
yes,
specific with that, which you could, there's no
yes.
way in hell they could pass something like that now. But that's sort of similar to what Australia's like white Australia policy was going on in
Well,
that.
we did, and we had the 10-pound poms.
Yeah, yeah.
We have next door neighbours who
You
were
want to
10-pound
explain that to
poms.
my students who won't know what it is
So a 10-pound pom,
unless they
yeah.
listen to Australian
So
TV.
you know what a pom is,
I
right?
know what a problem is. They probably might not. So yeah, go
A
on.
pom. So obviously in Australia we shorten many things. We call
Yeah,
French people frogs, and
yeah.
New Zealanders Kiwis,
It's
and Americans
universal.
Yanks. Well, the British are poms. Why I forget. I think I looked it up once, but I
You need to
forget.
find that out. I want to know next week why we're called Poms.
Um, I'll look up. That'll be my homework.
Yeah,
And in their infinite wisdom, the Australian government wanted to encourage good British stock to come
yeah,
over to Australia.
yeah.
And in order to encourage British immigration, they had a policy where you paid £10 and you come over to Australia and set up.
Mm.
How good is that?
Not bad. Like, I mean, I lived in
So
Australia and I worked in Australia. I'm happy I don't live there anymore.
that's because you hate the beach,
I do, I do hate the beach. I
which
think if you
is
don't like the beach, Australia's a
weird
pointless country. So yeah.
weird and inexplicable, but
I mean,
we'll let it
you can
slide.
say
So
my opinion on Australia, just getting off of this a bit tangent, is that the life revolves around beach, barbecues, surfing, and drinking, and that's literally the only four things
oh,
to do.
that's gonna be a lot worse.
Yeah, but
What's
that is.
wrong with that?
Am
You
I
gave a
wrong?
good ad. That was a great advertisement to
Yeah,
come to Australia.
if you like it, yeah. Some of my students are going. Some of my students are going next year to Australia to do the working holiday visa. But I mean,
Bravo.
am I wrong? That seems to be the only thing people do, which was great for
Ah.
3 months. And afterwards, I was like, "Do you ever do anything else?" And the answer is no.
Look,
And
I think that's slightly harsh, but
yeah, we're going off topic a little bit. But yeah, so like
yeah, so okay.
Yeah, non-white immigration was restricted, and that gets into what happens with Wilson in the 60s and social policies, which we'll get onto next week, and how
Yeah,
Wilson deals with this. But again, the government's mocked in private eye and mocked the weak because it's just seen as out of control. And a lot of the youth had not benefited from the social progress. So a lot of people had obviously benefited in the 50s, but it hadn't trickled down to everyone. So they were like, how do we deal with those, especially minorities or like groups that don't identify in the mainstream? We're having problems there. And then, of course, they appoint an Etonian, Douglas Hume. It's like, yeah, great. We're having a social revolution. Let's appoint the most socially retrograde MP we've got, even though he himself was quite cool. An old Etonian rich person who was
yeah,
in the House of Lords is not going to go down with the, in the
no,
mood of the I mean, who's America elected Kennedy? You've got Kennedy in the White House, and they make it's not going to match up on the
no.
side part. Although
So
Macmillan's,
now,
we didn't really talk
yeah,
about Macmillan's foreign policy, but we will have. Macmillan was obviously an uncle figure to. He got on well with Eisenhower and was an uncle figure. They'd worked together in the war and was an uncle figure to Kennedy, an advisor. But all of this gives a sense that the country is out of control. You know,
yeah,
it looks like there's no leadership. It looks like the social problems are all over the place. It looks like the economy is failing. Do you want to make a case for which one you think is most important of these?
yeah. I'll say the economy because
Go
I
on,
think
make
that's
the
what the
case.
conservative. Well, I think the conservatives ran on that,
Yeah,
and on especially on the rise of living standards.
yeah.
You've never had it better,
Hmm.
and once the economy turns around, I think then the the conservatives are stuck with that. It makes things a lot more difficult. So I would say, out of all of those reasons, I think that's probably the most important.
If you were going to make a counter argument for why the economy is more important than social problems and why more important than scandal and leadership, do you want to try? Because they'll need counter arguments. This one, they've got to put counter arguments in their essays.
So the social problems what give a sense that the government's kind of lost control,
Yeah.
that um, uh, that they're not doing enough to uh, well they're campaigning to obviously uh, improve living conditions, and yet you have all these gangs of young people.
Mm.
Is that's I guess that's so the sense of things falling apart through these social issues, through the protests,
I think if you were going to make
immigration.
it as well, like if you're going to argue that way around, you could argue that the economy was starting to fail. So it was impacting lots of people, and that was leading to these social issues. So, the housing
Yeah, oh,
formula was
good. Yeah,
failing to
okay, that's
implement
clever.
all these things. So the economy
Connect
was
them
leading to
together.
these social problems. They were coming out of it. And like the economy is falling apart meant that Macmillan's lack of leadership was exposed. So, if the economy was humming, people wouldn't have cared so much.
Yeah,
You can make that case. I'm going to argue that his leadership was the most weakest one for why they lost support. Because even though the economy was failing, what it shows is that there was no leadership. So I would argue the other way
yeah,
around, that there was
okay,
never any leadership. And that,
yeah,
that and that becomes really clear that Macmillan is not a competent person to organize it. And I would say that the
yeah,
social problems again, the division inside the party and the social problems again show that this government has no real control. They'd been cruise controlling through the 1950s and 60s. And when they actually had to deal with crises, they were spectacularly failing all across the board.
yeah. I think that's a
They
really good
needed it. I
argument.
think the country was like, we need someone to get a grip on this, someone more modern who can deal with these problems. And Douglas Hume is not that man.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very clever
Harold
way of
Wilson
putting it
was.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. And then the scandals are like I think these the coup de grace,
Yeah,
the
would they
kind
have
of the
happened under a
final.
stronger leader? Maybe not, but they probably would have been dealt with better, and he probably wouldn't have trusted, do you think
Yeah,
Thatcher would have trusted Perfumo's word on that? She probably would have looked at it, you know what I mean? A stronger
yeah,
minister
yeah,
would have probably dealt with that in a better
yeah,
way. But I mean, the
yeah,
scandals bring down long conservative rule. That's just what happens. It's exactly
yeah,
what happened to Major, the end of Major's government. It's exactly what happened with Boris Johnson, Liz Truss's government. You know what I mean? It's like long conservative parties always tend to get run down by scandals
yeah. Okay,
in a way that doesn't seem
sounds
to happen to the Labour Party. Although this Labour Party is having a few scandals with like Rachel Reeves and with Angela Rayner and a few others, but minor ones. They're never at the quite grand. The Tories do scandals at a whole nother level.
so they
Um,
seem to.
yeah, yeah, cool. So I think that's good enough. We're finished with this period of time, and then we can cover the 64 election up to the end of the Callaghan Wilson second term for next week.
Bravo.
Okay, cool.